Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Mullen. I'm the Manager of Communications and Marketing here at Essential Skills Ontario. I want to welcome everyone to our webinar today. Hopefully you can all hear me. We had some technical issues earlier, so if you can hear me, that'd be great if you could just let me know in the chat pane. So again, welcome to our webinar today, Maximizing Media Coverage with Mr. Ed Shiller. Before we get started, I just want to give you a few instructions. At the right-hand side of your screen is your dashboard. There you can chat with each other in the chat pane and ask questions in the question pane. If it's a technical question, myself or Amber Haas, our communication coordinator, will try to answer it and assist you. If you have any questions about the content, feel free to ask them in the questions pane throughout, and I'll ask Ed when we're nearing the end of the webinar. We do want to make this webinar as interactive as we can. And if you'd like to participate and keep the conversation going on Twitter, just use the hashtag ESOWeb. So on to our presenter. Ed Shiller has earned distinction as a journalist, public relations consultant, workshop leader, and media trainer. His journalism career spanned 15 years, during which he held senior editorial positions with the New York Times News Service, Reuters News Agency, Radio Denmark, and the Toronto Star. Ed has developed and implemented communication strategy and programs, acted as spokesperson and conducted communications training sessions and public workshops for many senior executives, spokespersons, and communications professionals. Ed also happens to be secretary on Essential Skills Ontario's Board of Directors. So with that, I will pass it over to Ed to get started.
Okay, well, thank you, Allison, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to Maximizing Media Coverage. During the next 60 minutes, we'll explore ways of increasing the scope and quality of the media coverage of your story without distorting, exaggerating, or sensationalizing the facts. Essential to maximizing media coverage is a solid professional relationship between you and the reporter. This relationship is defined by your desire for coverage of certain information that would be helpful to your organization and the reporter's need for timely and accurate facts and opinion. There we go. In effect, there are four relationships, or four pillars that support your relationship with the media, and they are identifying newsworthy topics, putting the news in forms that the media can use, getting your news to the media, and doing all this as quickly as possible without compromising accuracy. Now, this is funny. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a, there we go. The first pillar of newsworthiness basically means that the information you want the media to broadcast or published, right, is going to relate to their audiences. And I'll discuss this in more detail later on in the webinar. As for packaging or formatting a news release, in broad terms, there are two types of these packages. They are the soundbite, that is what you say in media interviews in reply to reporters' questions, and written documents, perhaps accompanied by audio and visual supplements. The most common of these documents is the news release. But there are also columns, commentaries, technical articles, all of which will be discovered and discussed in greater detail in a few minutes. The third pillar, there are many ways to distribute your story to the media. The most traditional and still one of the most effective is a distribution service such as Canada Newswire or MarketWire. These are closely monitored by major media outlets and by the growing number of specialized online media. But there are limitations. Some media outlets do not subscribe to a distribution service, and for some of those that do, your news release may pass through many hands before it gets to a reporter, and it could get lost along the way. New and sometimes not so new technologies present numerous supplemental or alternative means of getting your story to the media. Among them are telephone, snail mail, fax, and email. All of these not only make it possible to target specific media outlets, but also specific reporters, columnists, and editors. In addition, virtually every one of us now possesses the ability to self-publish by using websites, blogs, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and other social media. And while one could argue that social media do not strictly fall within the purview of media relations for the obvious reason that social media bypass the news media from the information dissemination process, they can nonetheless serve as a catalyst for media coverage by attracting the attention of reporters and editors. Indeed, many journalists surf blogs, tweets, and other social media for newsworthy information. In this regard, the social media serve as sources for traditional media. Social media often create a buzz that can propel events that would otherwise be ignored by traditional media into major prominence that attain significant radio, television, and newspaper coverage. The recent Occupy movement is a prime example of this phenomenon. In this regard, social media serve as a catalyst for traditional media. The news release is still the indispensable tool of both publicists and the journalists, but to be truly effective, speed, the fourth pillar, comes into play. Your news release, regardless of how accurate and comprehensive it might be, regardless of how well it might be written, or how highly regarded its credibility may be, will have diminished effect if it arrives in the newsroom much after the editor and reporter have digested and perhaps accepted as valid other accounts that may differ from your own. Or if it arrives in the newsroom too late in the day when reporters and editors are on deadline or after the deadline is passed. The speed with which you prepare and deliver your story is vital, not only because you must meet media time constraints, but also because you want reporters and editors to have your side of the story before they make up their minds. And this, of course, is of greater consequence during periods of crisis and controversy. Speed, however, still counts in day-to-day situations, especially since new technology has virtually wiped out the traditional concept of the deadline. This is especially important when answering reporters' inquiries. It is no longer valid to ask a reporter what his or her deadline might be when figuring out how much time you might have to get back to a reporter with requested information. The reporter is always on deadline. And if you wish to build a solid relationship with the media, so are you. You're always on deadline as well. Broadly speaking, news is whatever an editor believes will appeal to the kind of viewers, listeners, or readers that the media outlet wants to attract. Some stories generate the appeal because the information they convey will have an immediate and significant effect on people's well-being. Examples of such stories would be the levy of a new tax, the dropping of an election writ, tougher airport security measures, banks raising their mortgage rates, the death of a prominent figure, and so on. The newsworthiness of other stories may result from less tangible factors. How the story relates to other things going on at that time, where the events of the story take place, whether they touch an emotional chord, or even how well they are written and illustrated. I've tried to distill these often elusive factors into a concise definition that would not only be easy to grasp, but would also have extensive practical application. That is, it would help you weave your story in ways that would incorporate the most newsworthy elements in the most appropriate way. The first aspect of newsworthiness that I'll discuss is relevance. This is the impact that the factual information contained in the story may have on readers, viewers, or listeners. And I've divided relevance into four significant individual components. The first of these is the size of the impact. That is the degree to which a story affects you personally or the number of people that a story might affect. The greater the impact, the greater the newsworthiness of the story. So when you woke up this morning, what was the first bit of information you saw? Was it the weather? Was it the traffic? You have to make immediate decisions. How are you going to dress the kids for school? What's the best route to take to get to work? Do you want to drive, or do you want to take transit, and so on? So this is information you need right away. And because of that, that information is highly newsworthy, and you want to get it straight, unadulterated, without sort of any kind of embellishment on it. Timeliness of a story, that is, the temporal proximity of the story to the present, has a great effect on newsworthiness. Sometimes, or something that occurred this morning is more newsworthy than something that occurred, say, last week. Something that's happening tomorrow is more newsworthy than something that'll happen next year. Back in 1980, for example, just about everyone involved with computers knew that databases would go haywire in the year 2000 because they used only the last 2 digits of the year, and they were organized by that. But the story only became news during the last few months of 1999. In a similar vein, I think that some of the problems that people who are trying to convey the dire message of global warming or climate change are having a real problem because these changes, while they're taking place in little fits and starts today, are really going to have their tremendous impact 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, 100 years from now. And it's too far in the future for many people to wrap themselves around it and start dealing with it today. Geographic proximity. This is an event occurring in your backyard is of greater interest to you than an event that takes place in another city, province, or country. So tailoring your story to a particular community will increase its newsworthiness in that community. Credibility. This is, the more that people believe what your story says, the more newsworthy it becomes. This criterion can be used to make the seemingly mundane decision of how to attribute your story. If the credibility of the story derives from a particular individual, lead with that person's name. To say that Ed Shiller says the taxes will rise in next year's budget is not newsworthy because I have no say whatsoever in how taxes are. If the finance minister says it, then it's going to be newsworthy. And in that case, because the story derives its news value from that particular source, you lead with that person. So Finance Minister, Flaherty said today that he's going to raise taxes by 10% in next year's budget. If the credibility stems not from an individual, but from an organization, then lead with the name of the organization. So it might be that the ABC Widget Company today announced earnings of $25 million for the first 3 months ended November 30th, 2011. You don't have to give the name of the president or the CFO or any other individual. It's the organization, whereas it is Finance Minister Jim Flaherty said today that next month's budget will contain, say, several belt-tightening measures. The next major element of newsworthiness is topicality. That is, other events or issues before the public that relate to your story will make your story more relevant and hence more newsworthy. For example, when Lucien Bouchard lost a leg to necrotizing fasciitis, anyone suffering from that same disease in the few months following became newsworthy. You could have had the disease the day before Bouchard had it, and nobody would have cared, except obviously you and your family and friends, but not the media. Happening a day after, then it becomes news, and this might last for a few weeks or a couple of months. Similar things with steroid use when Ben Johnson lost his medals at the 1988 Olympics and so on. Now, human interest. These are stories that touch our heartstrings or affect our sense of justice and morality, and they tend to focus on the experiences of identifiable individuals. As Stalin once remarked, a single death is a tragedy. 1 million deaths is a statistic. Mundane stories may sparkle when human interest is added to the mix. Years ago, when I was a business reporter at the Toronto Star, I was assigned to write an article on how record low rental apartment vacancy rates in the city, were creating problems for people. I handed in a straightforward factual story reporting the latest statistics from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. The editor tossed it back to me with a dictum, put a people lead on it. He wanted a human interest story. So I rewrote the article, beginning with a brief account of the frustrations experienced by 3 families trying to find an apartment to rent in the city. The rest of the story remains substantially unchanged from my original version. By injecting human interest into what would otherwise have been a rather humdrum bit of copy, became a front-page takeout. Entertainment. If it's funny, if it's fun, or it's a bit offbeat, the media will love it. In effect, you're turning a weak story into a strong story simply by how it's told. It may be style over substance, but it's the style that holds people's interest, and it's legitimate. When I was an assignment editor at the Star, every once in a while, we'd have to run a story because of internal political considerations. You know, the publisher's cousin was putting on a flower show or something of that sort. Ordinarily, I might not have covered it, but here I had to. So I assigned a reporter to it. Well, I assigned a particular reporter to these kinds of stories. His name was Steph Donat. And I did because Steph had this wonderful, quirky way of looking at the universe. And he would take these stories that were really dull, but he would write them in such a way, maybe bring in a bit of human interest, or his style was just good to read, that it made interesting. Ernest Hemingway got his start at the Kansas City Star. He later wrote for the Toronto Star, but as a teenager, he wrote for the Kansas City Star, and I remember reading some of these early articles. And that's what it was. He was just using his descriptions of things around him, just drew you into it, even though the substance of the story, you know, was virtually meaningless. The most newsworthy element of any story, but unfortunately that element that can result in great distortion and misrepresentation of the truth, is controversy. Controversy is often the meat and potatoes of the media, but you don't want to cook your own goose with it. The fact is, you rarely, if ever, look good when ranting and raving, but the media may want you to because it's gripping and will thus sell more papers and attract more viewers. So you may have to diffuse reporters' efforts to embroil you in controversy. And the best way to do this is to restrict yourself to the facts, not to denigrate the integrity or motivations of other individuals or organizations. You're not going to get into a mudslinging sort of bout with other people. Now, most of the stories that organizations generate have low or moderate news value, most frequently because they lack high values in one or more of the 4 aspects of relevance. The naming of a new vice president, the issuance of unspectacular quarterly earnings, the opening of a new branch, an organization's views on the new federal budget, the winning of a new contract. These are all newsworthy events that will likely garner only limited media coverage. And at times this may suit you just fine. But on occasion, the attainment of certain organizational goals and objectives may depend upon generating a significant increase in public awareness of and willingness by people to act with respect to certain developments. In such situations, maximizing the scope and frequency of the media coverage of what might generally be regarded as a minor news story becomes an important communications objective. The key to maximizing media coverage is to leverage one or more of the criteria contained in the above definition of newsworthiness that I just discussed. Among the most common reasons stories have low news value are that nothing new has actually occurred or the facts have been previously reported. The impact of new or changing circumstances is not immediate or it is speculative. The relevance to people's lives is not readily apparent. The events described are taking place far away. A person or organization is unknown, so is easily overlooked by the media. Now, the following segments will now describe specific tactics that can be used to add newsworthiness to, that is, to harden soft stories. Since geographic proximity sharpens the relevance of a news story, adding local angles to your news release will increase its newsworthiness. The news release shown in the upper left-hand corner of the slide now on your screen is a good example. For those that may find it hard to see it, the first paragraph reads, 6 Canadian university and college students with disabilities today received the 2nd annual National Access Week Student Awards for their academic achievements and community involvement. This is what might be called the master news release, and I distributed this to media across the country. At the same time, I wrote additional news releases with each highlighting different recipients for distribution to the media in the regions where they lived or went to school. And one of these supplemental news releases, also shown on your screen, is headlined, Fort Saskatchewan Resident Receives National Access Student Award. And the lead reads, a 48-year-old University of Alberta graduate student from Fort Saskatchewan was among 6 Canadians with disabilities to receive the 2nd annual National Access Awareness Week Student Awards for their academic achievements and community involvement. The second paragraph named this recipient and briefly described her achievements. The remainder of the news release tracked the language of the master release. Speaking engagements are activities that, ostensibly at least, would take place in their own right, regardless of whether the media would take an interest. In point of fact, however, speaking engagements greatly enhance the newsworthiness of soft stories by adding timeliness, geographic proximity, and credibility, thus greatly increasing their relevance. The media coverage usually generated by such a speech tends to be uniform, with reporters giving a straightforward account of what was said. Now you follow 8 steps to get media coverage of a speaking engagement. Step 1, establish your news peg. This is the salient newsworthy point of the story, the one bit of information that will attract the greatest audience. Step 2, select the appropriate forum. Organizations such as the Board of Trade, Chamber of Commerce, or Rotary Club invite speakers for their regular luncheon or dinner meetings. Now bear in mind that they usually schedule speakers about 4 to 6 months in advance. To get an invitation to speak, email the organization with a proposal that outlines in 100 to 150 words the gist of the speech and extols the virtues of the proposed speaker. In a few days, follow up with a phone call. Also seize the opportunity when you or others in your organization are invited to speak either as a sole presenter or member of a panel at workshops or seminars organized by professional or trade associations. I mean, there are times when you don't have to search a speaking platform or an opportunity. They'll come to you, and then you accept them. Step 3 is to write the presentation. Step 4 is to prepare a media kit. This will always include the presentation and the news release on its content, but it may also contain a brief bio and photo of the speaker and relevant backgrounders or fact sheets. Step 5, several days to a week before the speech, invite the media to attend, telling them who is speaking and giving a brief description of the topic, being sure to include the news tag. 6 is email the full kit to all invited media on the morning of the speech. 7, distribute the news release to local and regional media on the morning of the speech, regardless of whether they will send the reporter to cover the event. And the final step is to hand out the media kit to all journalists, that's reporters, photographers, video camera operators, as they arrive at the presentation venue. Staging an event to get your message out makes the story timely, dramatic, and geographically proximate. The procedure for getting media coverage of a special event is almost the same as it is for speaking engagements, except usually there's no speech. Of course, if you do say a few words at the special event, you'll have also created a speaking platform which would include, and this would include the text, or you would thus include the text in the media kit. As with speeches, media coverage of special events will tend to be uniform with respect to salient facts. But because so much more is usually going on at special events than speaking engagements, reporters may approach the story from different angles and focus on different aspects of what occurred. Also, since some events, such as trade shows and exhibitions, may continue for several days, you can expect media coverage. You can expand media coverage by issuing news releases as the special or specific developments unfold. The news release and a newspaper clipping that you see on your screen are about an information demonstration staged by the Canadian Air Traffic Control Association at Pearson International Airport to garner public support for the position of the union in its collective bargaining with NAV Canada. The greatest value from the demonstration was not the effect it may have had on travelers passing through the airport that day, but rather in the hundreds of thousands of people exposed to the media coverage. The Toronto Airport event was only one of 7 information demonstrations held successively in cities across Canada. The demonstrations hardened the story by localizing it and giving it greater timeliness. This added significantly to the media coverage it received. The demonstration in Winnipeg, for example, received 3 days of coverage. On Monday, the day prior to the demonstration, I arranged one-on-one interviews with the local media and senior members of the union, and I'll talk more about setting up one-on-one interviews in the next segment. The interviews were broadcast by local radio on Monday afternoon and evening, and again on Tuesday morning. The local newspaper, the Free Press, interviewed the head of the union's Manitoba chapter and published the story in its Tuesday's editions, and that's what you see on your screen. A local radio and television covered the demonstration in the Tuesday newscasts, and the Free Press ran another story on the demonstration in its Wednesday edition. So I had coverage Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for one event. The facts and opinions you wish to convey in one-on-one interviews may be the same as those you raise in a speech and at a special event, but the coverage you get may be quite different. A speech or a special event occurs at a particular time and place. This enhances newsworthiness by emphasizing those aspects of relevance that relate to timeliness and geographic proximity. The stories printed or broadcast by the media tend to be similar since all reporters have been exposed simultaneously to essentially the same material. And the stories will be printed or broadcast right away since the various media outlets are in competition to report a breaking story as quickly as possible. With one-on-one interviews, however, each reporter has a greater opportunity to develop the story in his or her own way, and each media outlet can choose its own time for printing or broadcasting that story. That's because a one-on-one interview is a unique and private event that takes shape from the interaction between interviewer and interviewee. Each reporter doing an interview is really working in isolation from all other reporters from competing media outlets. Elements of timeliness and geographic proximity do exist in one-on-one interviews, and they add to the news value of the story. Indeed, this is why it is more effective to give interviews in the community in which the outlet resides. But timeliness and geographic proximity are usually supplemented by other aspects of newsworthiness, such as topicality or human interest. As a result, news coverage following one-on-one interviews tends to vary, both as to content and timing of publication or broadcast from one media outlet to the other. If your aim is to build awareness of and goodwill towards an individual organization or issue, rather than to promulgate specific factual information, then arranging one-on-one interviews would likely be more effective than speaking platforms or special events. Now, to set up one-on-one interviews, follow these steps. Choose the geographic area where you want media coverage. Step 2, establish a news peg. 3, write a news release that builds upon the news peg. Then assemble a media kit, which would consist of the news release and such other items as a bio and headshot of the person quoted in the release and giving the interviews. Include fact sheets on the topic and your reports, and corporate or product brochures, whatever is relevant. Then you set aside the time for the interviews. Then write a covering letter that notes what's in the media kit, mentions the most newsworthy element of the story, and invites the reporter or editor to set up an interview. Then you distribute the kit and covering letter about 5 to 10 days prior to the time you set aside for the interviews. Now, a day or two after distributing the media kit, call each journalist to whom it was sent to set up the interview. This is a soft sell call. If the reporter or editor expresses disinterest, briefly explain why you believe the public would be interested in the story, in effect giving the newspaper. If the journalist is adamant about not doing an interview, do not press the issue. You can further increase media coverage by combining one-on-one interviews with speaking engagements or special events. Most newspapers devote space to commentaries submitted by recognized experts on newsworthy issues that affect some aspect of public policy. Since this space is usually, although not always, on the page opposite the editorial page, the term op-ed was coined. In style and structure, op-ed articles are similar to the commentaries written by the newspaper's staff columnists. They're usually between 600 and 1,200 words long. They state arguments and opinions, give the facts to back them up, and in so doing, clearly explain how the public interest is affected by the issue. As to content, an op-ed page article conveys substantially the same messages that you would convey in a speech, a news release on a special event, or a one-on-one interview. It's only really the packaging that differs. And here are the steps to follow. 1, identify the news peg, same as for speaking engagements and one-on-one interviews. 2, write the article. It should be bylined by someone whose title or function indicates expertise in the topic of the article. 3, email the article to the editor, commentary editor, whatever, or opinions editor. They vary from publication to publication, with a covering note explaining that you're submitting the piece for publication on the newspaper's opinion pages. And then step 4, you may make a follow-up call to the editor a few days later to ask about the status of your submission and to give 1 or 2 of the most important reasons why you believe the public would benefit from reading it. The piece you're looking at here is something I wrote. Actually, I wrote this on an airplane. I was sitting in Vancouver Airport, actually returning to Toronto from a meeting with air traffic controllers, when, waiting to board the plane, when the announcement came that there was going to be a 10-minute delay because of air traffic control delays in Toronto. And this got me to think about a conversation I had had a week or 2 earlier with an air traffic controller who just was downright angry at being made the scapegoat, for these delays. As he put it, we can only land 1 plane at a time, and if 6 airlines insist upon scheduling their flights to land in Toronto at 6 p.m., there are going to be delays inevitably of 5 of those planes. Good point. Anyway, this was just seizing an opportunity that just hit me, or got sparked by that speech. And so I wrote this on the airplane, and by the time I landed in Toronto, it was all finished and ready to go. Now, if you have a story that's suitable for an op-page article, then the subject is one which the newspaper might also wish to write an editorial. If you also believe that the newspaper's position would be similar to yours, then set up a meeting with 1 or more members of the editorial board to explain the importance of the issue and why your point of view would prove beneficial. So here's what you do. You prepare an information kit containing the facts and your arguments on the issue. Then you send the kit with a covering letter requesting a meeting with the editorial board. You follow up with a phone call to the editor inquiring about the status of your request. But you may think that an editorial board meeting is off the record insofar as editorial writers rarely quote sources directly. Nothing you say is actually off the record. You can be quoted. Also, the newspaper will frequently invite the relevant reporters to the meeting, in which case the story might appear the following day as well as an editorial. And be pleased that this happens because you've just now gotten more bang for your buck. Now, there are about 800 English language and 300 or so French language community newspapers in Canada. It's weeklies. They do not usually publish breaking stories unless they have a direct impact on the local area. However, they will publish features of interest to broad segments of the population. These are ideal circumstances for articles containing helpful information on how to improve the quality of life, hence tips on such topics as healthcare, personal finance, food, recreation, travel, home improvement, and of course literacy. So if your organization is involved, even indirectly, in any of these areas, you become an appropriate source of tip articles for community newspapers. The advantage you reap from these does not stem from touting yourself or your organization in the articles. In fact, this is something you should never do. But from building goodwill as the messenger of good tidings. And so what you do is first identify a theme, write several columns about 250 words long, and you then distribute the columns to the community newspapers via email and post them on your website, Facebook, and other social media outlets. I generally like to, if I'm going to do a whole bunch over a period of time, I'll do 4 or 5 in one package to cover the number of say, Wednesdays or Thursdays in the given month, and then I will send them out. And if the next month has 4 Thursdays in it or whatever, I'll send them 4 columns and so on. So they have one for each week. Now you'll notice the ones here. The one I give you here is, yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, okay. I remember writing this one. The topic of this came from my own experience because every Christmas, my sister-in-law used to, when our kids were small, would send out tiny little toys and things. We're stocking stuffers, and we always have a great difficulty every year trying to think of something original to do. So this became a natural idea for a tip article. See? And now on this article, and you'll see, you won't see it, but on all the others I wrote, I put a little sort of pointer to the organization's website, making it relevant. You can get more information if you go to this website. So that's another benefit, is that you can draw people to your websites if you like. Now, while articles for community newspapers reach broad audiences in small geographic areas, technical articles for trade publications do the opposite. They reach narrow audiences, a very narrow demographic, usually experts in a field, but in large geographic areas. You could be an expert, in this case, a die casting engineer. So that's a pretty limited sort of demographic that I might be trying to reach, but you could be anywhere, in this case, anywhere in Canada. This publication you're looking at, is distributed across the country. But the effect of each, whether it's a community newspaper article dealing with broad demographics in a confined geographic area, the opposite, the effect is the same. You want to build goodwill and credibility among publics, either demographically broad or narrow, upon whom the well-being of your organization may depend. In this case, actually, in the article you see before you, my objective was in fact much more specific. I wanted a specific action. Namely, I wanted all the die casting engineers who read this, it was in a publication called Die Casting Engineer, to use zinc aluminum alloy as a replacement for plastic in such things you see in front of you here of a blender or coffee machine, or looking at my cell phone, what wraps the cell phone? Is it plastic or is it metal? In my case, I think it's both. Anyway, while the articles for trade publications may contain advice or recommendations in the application of specific products or technologies, as the one you're seeing before you, the articles must also be objective and not self-serving. You can't go and tell everybody that you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. Just to get these articles published, the first thing you do is identify topics for articles. That you can explore possible topics by perusing the editorial lineups of upcoming issues of trade publications that are read by one or more of your key publics. And most of these publications will devote issues to specific topics, and they do this for advertising purposes. So like Marketing Magazine, which is actually a weekly, at least it was, I don't know if it's still is. You know, they'd have 26 special issues a year devoted to different aspects of marketing. And I remember one of them, would always have to be in June, was on public relations. And then they'd get all the PR firms and those people who are supplying, you know, PR firms, you know, different ancillary services, you know, they would advertise in that issue. So after you maybe come across a few possibilities, you contact the editors with a proposed article that relates to the focus of an upcoming issue. I would look at least 3, 4, 5, 6 months in advance. If the editor likes the idea, then you discuss such particulars as length, you know, whether you want illustrations, what the deadlines are, and so on. And then you write the article to the agreed upon specifications, and then you deliver by whatever deadline you've agreed on. This article here that you're looking at actually came about rather casually. I was, you know, the vice president of marketing walked into my office and said, "Ed, could you do me a favor? Every year we have to write this article." He didn't like the idea of doing it. For a die casting engineer on, you know, how markets are shaping up for zinc. Would you mind writing it for me? And I said, sure. And then when I sat down to write it, I was recalling a conversation I had about a month earlier with the same guy. And he was explaining to me what zinc aluminum alloy was, and we talked about even some of the problems he was having in marketing it. He said they didn't have the staff, you know, the sales force to go and reach out to all of these, or many of these 3,000 or so relatively small die casting operations, you know, that were dotted across North America. So when he asked me to write the article, I said, great, this is now a solution. I can now reach all of these people directly with this article. Now, the social media can contribute to expanded coverage of your story in 4 basic ways. 1, posting your story in your blogs, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and other social media simultaneously with the distribution of your news release may attract the attention of bloggers and other self-publishers, as well as some mainstream reporters and editors. 2, social media coverage of your story may well capture audiences that miss the mainstream media coverage. 3, sending your story directly to digital self-publishers may result in online coverage even when your story is ignored by mainstream media. In fact, this one you're looking at here, actually Canada Newswire distributed it to everybody. Didn't get picked up by any of the traditional media, but it got dozens and dozens of hits on social media. A lot of self-publishers, you know, printed it verbatim. So it reached a fairly wide audience that way of people who had specific interest in, you know, this subject. And the 4th thing is that posting all your news releases on your organization's website creates a permanent archive that the media customers, employees, and others will find useful. Each news release should contain links as required to such relevant background material as text of speeches, financial statements, fact sheets, graphs, charts, and photographers. There you go. Now, this ends my formal presentation. Before answering your questions, I'd like to thank you for your participation in today's webinar. I hope it's given you a solid foundation upon which to build greater expertise and success in maximizing media coverage of your organization's activities, values, and achievements. And if you wish to explore opportunities for additional professional development in communications, please check out my website at www.edshiller.com for information on my public workshops, webinars, and in-house media training. And now, Allison, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Ed. That was great. That was a lot of good information there, I think, for everyone. So I do have a few questions here. the first one is actually from Ann Ramsey. How do we make a typical adult literacy learner's personal story more appealing while not exploiting them, which I think is a question that a lot of people in the literacy field have?
Well, this is a wonderful opportunity for any number of articles for community newspapers, for example. It's great human interest. You simply tell the story. Jane Doe was 33 years old. She was a single mother living in perpetual, poverty because she didn't have the skills to find a job in today's economy. But, she went and took these particular programs, right? Got these skills, and is now working full-time, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to be maudlin in your description. You're just very straightforward. These are stories people like to read, and they're getting information through those stories, about how to improve the quality of their own life, because you would give the programs or the steps to follow to get the required level of literacy. So I don't think it's maudlin. It's just how you tell the story.
Right, and I guess it would be about taking it back to the program, that it's about hopefully more people will see themselves in that story or someone they know in that story.
But, and you have certain programs that you're either doing directly or sponsoring or supporting. Well, for the programs that you would relate it back to, absolutely. Now you got to be careful. It can be maudlin, and it can be dangerous. When I was an assignment editor, assistant city editor at the Toronto Star, oh God, I remember they would run these articles, these sort of tear-jerking articles, and many of them, were off the mark. I mean, they were using human interest, and I felt, in a distorted way. In fact, when you look deeper into the story, you might have realized that there was no validity to it. So I would tend to kill those stories, but it doesn't mean that legitimate stories of people's experience wouldn't want to be read. I think you could have several columns on this to distribute across the country.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, since you started in the media field, how are you seeing it changing? Do you think it's getting harder and harder for people to get attention now with all the different forms of journalism and social media, or is it getting easier?
Well, it's both. It's getting harder, it's getting easier, and it has definitely changed. The change it's a sea change between my first involvement in the media many, many years ago. My first job it was in 1966, and today. The change is technological, which has meant that anybody now could get into the media field. You have such diversity, such segmentation of media, and which means that you don't have any individual sharing with all other individuals similar exposures. I mean, when I was a kid going to grade school, I remember we'd wait online to get in, before the doors open in the morning. And, we were all sitting around discussing Uncle Milty, right? Or, this particular I Love Lucy show. We had 3 or 4 TV stations. That was it. Everybody watched the same thing. It was a lot easier. Now it doesn't work that way. So you have to work harder in segmenting your stories and plugging into a greater diversity of media outlets. But it also means that you can reach a lot more people a lot quicker if you do it well.
And on a cheaper budget, if you will. Twitter and social media now are, they're free. It's just a lot of effort.
Yeah, it is. Now, you can make life easier for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In a number of ways. For example, the news release here that I showed you on my daughter's conference she was helping organize. Now, that was distributed for free, but if not for free, Canada, the cost now I can tell you exactly because I did one just a month ago, for just over $400. Canada Newswire will distribute a news release to virtually all traditional Canadian media, and about 5,400 online points worldwide. So for a relatively small amount of money, you can reach, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people. In fact, I just did one where the thing was translated into 6 or 7 languages. I just Google it, and you find out how they've been. And it led to immediate reproduction of that news release in and days that followed its distribution, but even weeks later, other publications, online publications dealing in that area, would follow up the story, would do their own versions of it. So, I had hundreds and hundreds of publications for very little money. Also, you can subscribe to directories, online directories, where you create your own lists, and then you can download those, usually into Excel. So you create your own distribution so that maybe now the subscription for these, if you want to get worldwide, I was just checking actually yesterday with Canada Newswire that they're $2,950 or something for an annual subscription. But if you're going to send out a dozen or 2 dozen news releases, then it really pays to do that.
Perfect. I have a question here about, do you have any tips for a story that promotes an event like the PGI golf tournaments for literacy? So these are, I hope I explained this right, but national golf tournaments that take place across the country to raise money for literacy.
You mean how to promote them?
Yeah, any tips for promoting?
Yeah, okay. The first thing I would do, now I'm going to have to develop a strategy very quickly in my head, but the first thing I would send out a news release that covers, all the points I can think of that would be interested on the event itself. Then I could follow this up with local stories, stories that are talking about any local activities. Maybe little tip articles on relating, to literacy itself, and interject in these perhaps, something about the fundraising efforts. I'm not one, I should say right now, that, for golf tournaments and stuff like that, this isn't generally the way I feel comfortable going just for myself. It may work. I'll be better off constantly to push through all the techniques I've discussed about, say, the benefits of literacy and the specific programs that you're working on and why it is necessary for the general well-good. And if you do this on an ongoing basis, and then you do have something like a golf tournament to raise funds, you'll build upon all that awareness and goodwill that you've generated over the years, directed towards this one event.
Okay, perfect. I have another one, I guess, kind of asking for tips. I work for a VPI in a small town. Sorry, I guess I'm not really sure what VPI stands for, but we are ministry funded and offer free resources and employment services. We offer skills workshops through the week and late Wednesday nights. No one is coming out. I'm wondering how to increase my attendance through media.
Okay. Now, who are the people you're trying to reach? I got to find that. These are.
I think they're trying to reach, adults who could use these workshops.
Okay.
In a small town.
Well, a lot of community newspapers offer calendars of upcoming events, and those are free. So write a 10, 15, 20-word blurb on what it is and ask them to do it, and they'll probably just put it in. Then you can do pieces on each one as they come up. Now, if you can plug any of these workshops into any public issues that are going on at the moment, and I'm sure there would be, the way it is, the skewing that's in the workplace, need for just about everybody, regardless of what job you do, to develop skills. What is it, Menial No More, that wonderful booklet that you guys produced. These are really topics that would make, I think, good listening on radio talk shows, on online talk shows, for blogs that you may want to distribute. So constantly, make contact, develop a nice little media kit, contact a local talk show host, and, see if you can interest that person in having you on, to discuss some of these issues. Relate these issues to the broader public policy concerns of the day, to the general welfare, the general prosperity, and how it affects us all. Once you tie that into how any of us, all of us, could benefit, then you've made it more newsworthy, and you would be able to reach in these areas. But also get your blogs and get your stories out to not only the traditional media, but to the social media. I think you will increase it.
No, I think those are all good points. Another question here, can you create a compelling story without an individual story? In literacy, often adults don't want to be profiled as the adult literacy poster child. We have many great stories, but the people don't want to be mentioned.
Well, you can. I think it's less effective. What you may want to do then, if you can't get an individual to say, look, I didn't have proper literary skills, I couldn't read a financial statement, I couldn't read the newspaper to understand it, but now I can. I could see how these people might be reluctant. But let's look at the other side of that coin. What about the employers? You know, they may have stories that they want to tell, how their business benefited by hiring people through these literacy programs. And then these people would be more than willing to talk, and they don't have to mention the names of the people they hired, of course, but they'll mention their own. So you get that human interest, that human interaction, say, from that perspective.
Right, and you get that kind of 360 view of it.
Right.
One last question. Your opinion on flyers these days. You know, a lot of programs are using flyers now. What elements would help, you know, are there other elements that would help attract a wider audience? Do you think things like flyers and handouts are still useful, pamphlets?
Yeah, I do. Certainly they're useful in political campaigns. You know, if you have a story that you want to tell to everybody, this broad demographic in a community, then that's what a flyer does. I mean, flyers are not directed demographically, they're directed geographically. The important thing is the content of it. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Some years ago, I was head of the school advisory council where my kids went to elementary school. And so we would have this fun fair in the end of May. And we wanted to auction off a lot of stuff. So we decided to go to all the local merchants and have them donate materials. Well, the tack I took there was not of how much, we need the stuff, we're poor, we need it. No, I spoke of success. This school was probably one of the best elementary schools in all of Canada. So I was talking of that, and now you could further advance this success because we want more computers and so on. And it got a great response. I did this not in terms of a flyer, but actually a letter that people who were going around proselytizing on behalf of the fun fair would bring in to all of the organizations. But I could, or to all the businesses and their proprietors. But I could see the same being done to a flyer as well, and then you just follow up. Yeah, I think flyers still would work, but it's content that's key.
Perfect. Well, it's 2 o'clock, so that's all the time we have today. So thank you so much, Ed, and everyone who joined in with us today. And we will be following up with emails on where you can find the webinar online. So thank you very much, Ed. And
thank you,
everyone.
You're quite welcome. It's my pleasure.
Okay. Have a great day, everyone.